You may want to get your Bible and open it up to Mark chapter 12. We're going to have another lesson about Jesus this morning. I try to do this really as I prioritize my lessons. I always try to make sure I'm preaching one of these lessons about Jesus every month. And we've been watching Jesus for several months now as he is confronted in the temple. And what's happening there? Well, that's going to be coming to a close today. And Jesus does not always necessarily meet our expectations. He can be surprising. Now, you have heard it said that if you're going to commend someone, do it publicly. And if you're going to rebuke someone, do it privately. And that is good advice. But that's not what Jesus is going to do this time. He is going to rebuke publicly and commend privately. So these rules don't always apply in every situation. And we're going to see something about Jesus and something then about God, because that's who he is, that we may not have expected as we look at this today. We're going to be talking about self-centered Sadducees and a poor widow. These two stories come right at the close of Jesus being in the temple, and together the way they are in Mark and also in Luke, they appear to be somewhat in contrast one with another. See what you think as we go into this. Now in Mark 11, verses 27 and 28, that's where this began, where the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders, Jesus is walking in the temple. That doesn't mean he's walking in a big church building. This is the temple grounds, a great, large area. Think about 2 football fields put together. He's out there in that temple complex, and they come and confront him, saying, who's giving you this authority? It's the chief priests, the scribes, and the elders. And as we go through this, he's going to be confronted also by Pharisees, Herodians, and Sadducees. They're all ganging up on Jesus. One of them asking a question, another asking a question, and he's dealing with all of them. And as he does this, the people that had gathered there for that Passover feast, they're hearing this going on and they're gathered around. The common people heard Jesus gladly. And the impression now is that there's a multitude that is gathered and they have been witnessing this. And Jesus has bested them with every question and asked them questions that they could not answer. And so Jesus turned loose on them. Now that they have nothing to say. Matthew goes into this in more detail. He has a whole chapter of this. And Jesus is going to rebuke these men in a manner that is more severe than you're going to read about in all the prophets of Israel. Here's what he says in Matthew chapter 23 in his account. Now, he's got 31 verses dealing with this. Jesus speaks to the multitude. Here they are. And all these common people, this multitude has gathered. He turns from them. He's going to speak to the multitude. And look what he says. Woe unto you, scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. He calls them children of hell. He says, you'll go out and make one proselyte and make him 2-fold more a child of hell than yourselves. They're blind guides. Fools and blind, will strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. He is ridiculing them. Now, in my mind, I can almost hear a chuckle going through with the common people. See, these guys had thought they were so great. And here's a prophet of Galilee just excoriating them. And he said, you'll strain at a gnat and swallow a camel. And you almost hear people laughing at him now. He says, ye make clean the outside of the cup and platter, but within they're full of extortion and excess. Think of a cup. It's all clean outside, and you look down in it, and it is nasty. That's who you are. He said, you're like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, but are within full of dead men's bones, full of hypocrisy and iniquity. Ye serpents, you generation of vipers, how will you escape the damnation of hell? Well, that's pretty sharp rebuke, isn't it? Mark doesn't go into it in that detail. But in Mark chapter 12, we read this. He said unto them in his doctrine, beware the scribes, which love to go in long clothing, and love salutations in the marketplace, in the chief seats in the synagogues, and the uppermost rooms at the feast, which devour widows' houses, and for a pretense make long prayers. These shall receive the greater damnation. Let's look at that. These scribes, here's what they love: long clothing. Well, I see people love that today. You go on YouTube and look, maybe look at some of these high church places and look what their preacher looks like. Some of them almost look like they're dressed up like they're going to celebrate Christmas. These big long robes and they love those special clerical garments that they wear. That makes them feel special. And then it says they love salutations in the marketplace. You know, sometime I'll go out and somebody will say, hey, preacher. Well, you know, I like that too. But not like these guys. I mean, these guys just love to be treated special. I heard about 4 preachers sitting at a table. One of them said, you know, where I go, where I preach, they call me Reverend. And the other preacher said, well, they call me Holy Reverend. And the other preacher said, well, they call me Most Holy Reverend. And the 4th preacher said, well, they call me Most Holy Dr. Reverend. And it just goes on and on and on, you know. And these are the guys, they love that. They want to be above everyone else. Here it is. They love the chief seats in the synagogue. Look at these seats up here, okay? See, when you sit there, everybody can see you. I remember bashful Brother Oswald. You may not know, he used to pray for Roy Acuff on the Grand Ole Opry. And, you know, they get up and test the mic. He'd get up and test the mic and say, can everybody see me all right? They want to be seen is what they want. And when the men sit up here, they're not sitting up here to be seen. This is up here for convenience so they can easily come back to the pulpit and all. But I tell you what, if you love to sit up here, if that's what you just love, maybe you ought to just keep your seat and just come up when it's your time, if that's what you love. These synagogues, I'm going to have to go on because there's a lot to cover here, but these synagogues, they're arranged a little different than we are. Think of, instead of pews facing a pulpit, think of pews all the way around the building, all 4 sides, okay? And then think of another level of pews above that and another above that, sort of coming down like this to the floor in the middle. This is how the synagogue was at Magdala. Now there'd be a stone out there in the middle that's for the scroll. And the fellow would sit down there on that lower pew or that lower bench and open that scroll and read from the scroll. And they called that Moses' seat. See, he's reading from the law of Moses. So they just called it Moses' seat. Now, the chief seats were those that sat by that reader and up behind him. All the attention they like the chief seats up there. That way everybody can see them real well. See, that's where they wanted to sit. And then it said they loved the uppermost rooms at the feast. Well, now I know they'd have feast in upper rooms of those places, but even those feast places, there'd be special places at the table. One of these places, and I didn't go look this up again, but you'll remember the story, where Jesus said, when you come into the feast, don't sit up toward the head. They might ask you to move down. Go sit down at the back and let them ask you to move forward. See, but these guys, they wanted to sit right up there at those best seats, those uppermost places, so everybody can see that they're really special. It's in Matthew 23:5. When Jesus is talking there, why are they doing this? All their works they do to be seen of men. That's what they're after. They're vain. They think the attention of men is what they will pride themselves in, and that will amount to nothing, will it? But they do this to be seen of men. Now, number 5, they devour widows' houses. How do they do that? Widows. They're the most vulnerable. It's the men that had all the rights and all the rules and did everything, and they took care of their wives. But when the man dies and she's a widow, now who takes care of her? She's somewhat helpless. And there are those that are taking advantage of those that are helpless for their own gain. The Lord has a tender heart toward the helpless and toward widows. And from the early days of the church, they're looking after widows. You remember in Acts 16:1? Now, the Grecian widows were being neglected. Now, this wasn't done on purpose, and they corrected this. But the idea is here, the church there from the very early time, they're looking after their widows. They're trying to take care of them. In 1 Timothy 5 and verse 3, honor widows that are widows indeed. Now, a widow indeed is a widow in need. I've heard that. That pretty well explains it. Yeah. We're going to study this as we go through 1 Timothy. Widows, first thing to do is try to take care of yourself. That's the first thing you do. But if you can't do it, you've got a family, and the family's to step up and take care of their widows. But if they're widows indeed, they can't take care of themselves, and their family's not able to do it or won't do it, then the church can step in and help take care of those widows. That's what we're going to read about that. God wants his people to look after the helpless. We read in James 1:27. Notice how this is constructed here. Pure religion and undefiled before God. Two things, pure religion and undefiled. What's the pure religion? To visit the fatherless and widows in their affliction. What's the undefiled? To keep oneself unspotted from the world. Pure religion. It's not a bunch of ritual, is it? James doesn't describe religion as, okay, you go through these motions, you do this ritual. No, it has to do with how you look after the helpless. That's real religion, pure religion. Well, they were devouring widows' houses. How they did that, I don't know, but they're taking advantage of them some way. And then for a pretense, they make long prayers. There's nothing wrong with a long prayer. I read in the Bible where Jesus prayed all night. I don't even know if I've ever prayed that long. And sometimes people have a long prayer in the assembly. I tell you, there's nothing wrong with a long prayer, but if they're doing that long prayer as a cover to appear righteous, when they're doing something like devouring widows' houses and that word provoke, the word pretense. It's translated cloak. Here's where it is. Look. For pretense make long prayers. Here's another place you find that word, and it's in that context. For neither at any time use we flattering words, as you know, nor a cloak of covetousness. I'll say we weren't trying to hide covetousness. Paul had nothing to hide from the Thessalonians. A cloak of a pretense of covetousness. It's the same word. God is witness, nor saw nor of men sought we glory. See, that's what they were doing. Seeking the glory of men. Those Sadducees, those scribes. And it says, these shall receive the greater damnation. There's a reckoning. What if you have all the praise and applause and attention of men, and then you receive damnation? What good has that done you? It's done you no good at all. And the greater damnation. Now that's one of those passages you can look at to think, there's degrees of damnation. There's a doctrine of annihilation, that if you're wicked and you die, you're just annihilated. Well, what's the degrees in that? How can you be annihilated greater than someone else is annihilated? No, that there's degrees of damnation. Lets us know that this damnation continues. It's everlasting punishment, isn't it? Well, Scene 2. Jesus did not immediately leave the temple, but he sat where he could see where they were bringing money into the temple and giving, and there came a certain poor widow. Here's the contrast. Certain. That word certain is interesting. I wish I knew why that word was there. Why didn't Mark just say, and there came a poor widow? But there's a certain poor widow. It makes you think there's somebody in particular they're referencing here, and we don't know exactly who that was. A certain poor widow comes, and she threw in 2 mites, which make a farthing. A farthing is a Roman coin. It's the smallest Roman coin of value. If we Romans, we'd think a farthing, we'd think a penny. Okay, a penny. Their pennies were worth more. It'd take several farthings to make what the Bible calls a penny. But think of us. I got a penny. Now, a mite is a Greek coin. Half a cent. If you haven't got a penny, a half a cent will do. You remember that little song? Half cent. She had 2 farthings. And I guess she could have just given 1 and kept 1. But this poor widow is now down, she's right down to 2 half cents. And she comes up and she gives that to the Lord, to the temple treasury. What good does that do? Is that going to do anybody any good? 2 half cents. Look what happens. She did cast in. She of her want did cast in all that she had. She had a want. She had needs. And all she had was 2 half cents. But she gave everything. She gave all. Now, 1 Timothy 5:5. We'll talk about this when we get to 1 Timothy. Now, she that is a widow indeed and desolate trusteth in God and continueth in supplications and prayers night and day. God knows. God takes care of widows. Now, he's going to use us to do it, but he's going to do it. If he doesn't use us, he'll use some other means. This certain poor widow must have thought, that's all I got. I'm going to trust God. She gave all she had. Well, Jesus said, verily I say to you, and he's saying this privately, this isn't before the multitude. This poor widow have cast more in than all they which have cast into the treasury. For all they did cast in of their abundance. But she of her want did cast in all that she had, even all her living. You know, I've heard sometimes you need to give till it hurts. You ever heard that? Give till it hurts. Well, she gave beyond that. And there's joy in giving. It's more blessed to give than receive. And so give till you start feeling that joy. She gave all she had to the Lord. Now, I'm going to close this with 3 things we're going to learn here about giving. Number 1, Jesus is interested in our giving. It's a private matter, isn't it? It's between me and God, but it is between you and God. And God knows what you can give, and He knows what you give. Jesus is watching our giving. Matthew 6. Take heed you do not your alms before men to be seen of them, otherwise ye have no reward of your Father in heaven. Therefore when thou doest thine alms, do not sound a trumpet before thee, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and in the streets, that they may have the glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. They get the glory of men. But when thou doest alms, let not thy left hand know what thy right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, thy Father which seeth in secret. See, God sees. He sees in secret. He's interested in our giving. He'll reward thee openly. Number 2, Jesus watches how we give proportionately. Yeah, those that have a lot can give a lot. You know, I've heard those that say they raise money for mission work. Oftentimes it's those that don't have much that give the most. They give proportionately. Jesus is aware of that. In fact, that's how He tells us to give. 1 Corinthians 16, verses 1 and 2. Now concerning the collection for the saints, as I've given order to the churches of Galatia, even so do ye. When? Upon the first day of the week. What? Let everyone lay by you in store. Don't wait till the need. Prepare ahead of the need. Lay by in store. 3, as God hath prospered him. It's not that everyone's got to give a temple tax or a head tax of a certain amount apiece. You know, no, as God has prospered him. I was reading the other day, someone, I think it's on Facebook, said we need to go by the New Testament and tithe. And I thought, what? Tithing was part of the Old Testament, where they say you give 10%. Tithing is not in the New Testament. It's even a greater responsibility now. You got to. God's not going to tell you, you know, you give this much and you'll be all right. That's not how it works. It's your heart, and it's as you've prospered. It's not about tithing. And then he says that there be no gatherings when I come. 1 Corinthians 8. I'm not going to go into all this for your time, but it's a great, great chapter. 2 Corinthians 8 and 9 talks about the Macedonians gave an abundance out of their poverty, and more than Paul thought they were going to give. He said they gave every man as he purposed in his heart. As he purposed in his heart. See, they first gave of themselves, and then they purposed in their heart. And God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that ye, always having all sufficiency in all things, may abound to every good work. That tells me God took care of that widow. She gave all she had. Somehow God provided for her. We don't know how He did that, but He promises that He will. You can't outgive God. And number 3. God can do great things with our small things. Zechariah 4:10, in a little different context, says, who hath despised the days of small things? And sometimes we get to thinking, oh, that's such a little thing. I have so little to offer. I have such few talents. Moses, what is that in thine hand? It's a rod. Look what God did with that rod. The mighty works performed is just a rod. Think of a small child. The potential that lies there is tremendous, isn't it? And what that child's going to do with their life. Think of those 2 mites. Very small thing. I just wonder how many millions and millions of times the value of those 2 half-cent pieces have been multiplied over and over and over. And this story has gone down through history and caused us to think, what about my giving? What am I giving? And the result of that and letting that dwell on our conscience, we say, I can do better with my giving. If that poor widow can give 2 mites, what about my giving? And so with those 2 little things, wonder what great things God has done as a result of that. Well, that's going to bring it to an end. I'm not trying to wring money out of you. Don't think that. Now, I know there are preachers that'll do that. They think it's about the money, and they're really trying their best to wring it all out of you that they can so they can pad their own selves. Now, that's not what I'm doing. But we need to make sure we know what the Bible teaches about giving and then challenge ourselves. And it'll encourage us. There's great joy in giving. In fact, among the gifts that belong to different people in the church, there's one, that gift of charity. Some people have that gift of giving. And that's a joyful gift to have. And so let's think of our giving. Now compare that. Poor widow. Put in her 2 mites. Maybe even embarrassed that that's all she can do. And that's it. And the great glory that comes to her. And these proud scribes, Pharisees, Sadducees, chief among the priests, the Herodians, they want all the attention of men. They receive the greater damnation. Quite a contrast in those stories, isn't it? Now with this, Jesus is going to leave the temple. Well, that tells us something about our Lord. Tells us something about our God. And isn't it wonderful to know, no matter how small and insignificant we might think we are, God does not think we're small and insignificant. He knows the potential, and He sees in secret. You need to be a child of God. You want to be like that poor widow. You want to humble yourselves before God and be baptized into Christ and live a life given totally unto Him. If you're ready to decide to do that this morning, we'll sing this invitation song.